my name is Molly. For this assignment, I was looking at something that's kind of personal to me. I tend to do this from a lot of my assignments. I try to learn from my past and see what information I can gather from it. For this assignment in particular, I wanted to research a industry that I worked in for about 7 years, and that's the donation industry. And my big start got in New Mexico when I was in my 20s. I moved there to go to school. I was going to finish my degree, become a doctor, do all these things. I got caught up in working in the death industry. It was at the Office of Medical Investigators, as well as finding my first job at the eye bank out there. At the time, it sounded fascinating. I was the poster child for donation, just really passionate about it. Supported the industry, went on eventually to become a certified eye bank technician, which means I was a level 3 technician that would release all the tissue for transplant, was able to evaluate it, was able to do all the things that are required to make sure that the tissue was safe and where what it was needed to be for releasing for transplant. So what I noticed over the years working there is that as the years went on, I became a little bit more jaded and started to notice more practices that made me think about continuing working in that industry, and it eventually led me to leaving it, like I said, after 7 years. I acknowledge that some of that probably was burnout, and working with deceased individuals and the families of those individuals can be very stressful and taxing. I knew that it was something that I couldn't do forever, and when I left, I went from being that poster child to someone that was kind of anti-donation. So I really wanted to put my ethical hat on and look at this from a different perspective to see if my feeling about this was based upon my experiences. This is a personal thing that I actually saw, or if there's actually some standards and practices that made me question it. It's a big subject to copy, and I wasn't, or to tackle, and I wasn't able to get through everything. I did try to cover what I could, and I really focused on kind of the consent process and the aspect of where tissue goes, and looking at the donor families of how they're kind of communicated with during this process. What I found is that there's not a lot of scholastic articles regarding this. I did find some government documents, webcasts, different discussions on it, but there's not, the straightforward study to say that this is the standard practice and this is what's going. So for starters, let's just do some basic information about donation that kind of has changed. So for me, this was something that, was many years ago that I have been out of, and I knew kind of a basic, I knew what I knew from then, and I didn't realize that terms and things had changed, and there's actually a whole ethical discussion and dilemma with donation and almost every facet of it. There is donation after brain death, which is called DBD. I used to just think of it as brain death, and that was my organ donors. And what that is described as, it's an individual that has suffered a catastrophic brain injury, and brain death criteria have been met. The most important thing to remember is that brain death and death from both clinical and legal perspective. So the other type is donation after cardiac death, which to me used to just be tissue donation and eye donation. I didn't, really realize that they've actually gone into certain organ procurement after cardiac death, and I found out that now they actually have gone into that field. And so what that is DCD is what it's referred to, and it's when the patient or the individual is unlikely to proceed or to progress and to full brain death. They have a very poor prognosis. They're not getting any better. The family's deciding to take them off life support, and then the issue of, the donation can be presented to them, or they've requested donation for that individual. Now, organ donation is only a small percentage of what actual donation is. Most donation is tissue donation, including eyes. Because for the, organ donation, you actually have to have people meet certain criteria, including blood tests, screening, all those things. Well, what I found out is that, and another quick note is in DBD, you can donate about 8 organs. You can do, heart, kidneys, lungs, liver, I think some small intestine. In DCD, it's primarily used for, again, tissue donation, and then you can also donate kidneys and liver. But that brings up how we define death, and this is the first big ethical dilemma that I actually kind of found of this that I wasn't really meaning to find. And the ethical controversies in organ donation after circular death, they discuss what's called the dead donor rule, and this is a very important thing. And that's one version is that organ recovery must not cause the donor's death. This is to protect killing innocent people. The other version is the donor must be dead before the recovery of vital organs. And there was a couple different things that looked at it, and one was the American Academy of Pediatrics that was exploring this, of just how, to make sure this is being done in an appropriate way, because there were instances where individuals were being prepped or prepared for donation prior to death, which means that it kind of played with the dead donor rule. And what it actually led to is a bunch of the different articles talking about how they're trying to redefine dead, which can create a lot of, you can only imagine the complications that could create. That was not what I was focusing on, but it did bring up an interesting issue of just how things in the industry have changed. The main thing that's happening is there's not enough donors. So they're trying to find ways to get donors, and they're trying to do it any means possible. What I was hoping to look at is within consent for donation of what changes are being made within on a government and state level, and then find as much as I wanted to express that. But let me go back to tissue donation here. In many ways, tissue donation is more simple. You have 24 hours to recover tissue. It doesn't have the risk of rejection as it does with organ donation. You can recover with illnesses that you can't do with organ donation, and with corneas, you can recover with cancer. It's an avascular tissue that can actually have many different diseases that would be ruled out for all other donation can be considered for eye donation. But what I was realizing and saw it, and I didn't know the statistics, and it was interesting to see that, in the early 90s, it was a 20 million industry, and by 1994, it was $1 billion industry, and it's probably 3 times as much as that now. Also, the number of donors has tripled. There was a statistic that there was probably about 850,000 tissue transplantations in 2002. Now, as this grew, some regulation grew and some regulation didn't, but one of the big caveats was that in tissue donation, there's allowances for recovering reasonable costs for recovery, but there's no true guidelines to specify that, and there's also no true set guidelines on where the tissue has to go to. And that kind of got me into the issue of consent, like I specified before, and where I was looking at it. So again, you can donate your corneas, your sclera, your valves, skin, bone, tendons, and when I was working in the field, I would, be present for consents and information about tissue donation, where it was always told that it was going to a burn victim, or it was always going to go to this person that needs a heart valve. And then you come to find out that it may not be the standard of that. It gets sold to other companies for processing, and that company can actually send it off to whoever they want for whatever purpose they want. And it just made me question, this is one of the issues that made me question the industry a little bit, is do people really know that? So for consent for donation, I always just kind of assumed it was the goodwill of the hospital saying that this is what this person wants to donate, this is where it is, and I didn't really realize that CMS, Medicare, Medicaid, had actually put some mandates in that hospitals must notify their local OPOs of any potential donors that might have, which is what kind of, we know that there's a need for it, but they were the ones kind of backing this up, which is great in the extent that they're pushing donation, but then it also is how much are they going to push it, and why are they doing so? And when you're looking at donation, you can be a voluntary donor, which means that you want to donate it. You can express your donation, like you mark it on your driver's license. So or you did let your family know your wishes. If you don't let your family know your wishes, or you don't mark anywhere, then, or if you mark on your driver's license and your opinion changes, how is that expressed to donation agencies, and do they have any ability to push for procurement when you might not have wanted that to occur? The main thing about consent, though, that I really wanted to cover is do families really know what it's going for and understand it? What I learned from working in the field is that it was a time when families are very confused and struggling, obviously. And my best ability to explain things doesn't mean that they always would get that after the fact, and I would have to sometimes occasionally re-explain to them. Or within tissue donation, do they really know that it could have gone for a purpose that they may not have expected? And is that really fair to them? I mean, what does this do to their autonomy? What does there do to everyone's right on it? So it's something that has made me question the industry as a whole. And so what I found is I was looking for documentation and things like that to show if there's any standard practices or any examples of when it was or when not done. The industry is pretty hush-hush. Not many people actually talk about it. I did find a really cool NPR segment that was discussing donation, and it had a gentleman named Chris Truitt who ended up working for a tissue donation agency after his daughter died. He had the same experience as me, being very gung-ho, going in and working it for about 4 years and then realizing maybe not the place that I thought I was working for. And now has become an advocate, trying to educate people about donation, not to say not to donate, but to make sure that they are really informed about what's going on. And my paper goes more into depth about what he discovered and what he learned and what he was going for. It turns out he was in a couple articles, though. So again, it makes me question his perspective, because if he's going to every source and trying to get heard and be told about, is it more for his financial gain or for a different reason, or is he really trying to educate people about the industry? A lot of the documentation I found is that what families are told is not where tissue goes. And I give specifics about it, and pretty much it, quote is heart valves can be cut out and used to create medical devices that can be sold for profit around the world. Families often don't know that when they okay donation to nonprofit organizations such as the Center for Transplant Donor Network, these tissues routinely go for profit companies, feeding $1 billion industry that uses those tissues from everything from paring a knee to plumping up a penis. So it kind of goes into looking at what is the whole industry's intent as a whole. In the article, or the document by the Office of the Investigator, it's really kind of fascinating. It's Inspector General. It's called the Informed Consent in Tissue Donation. This actually looks at some of the specifics of kind of what needs to be addressed in donation and what they recommend. They actually came out and recommended to make changes, and I'd be curious to see if they were. I didn't find any documentation that it was. And it looks at when looking at the donor families, you need to make sure they get a copy of the signed consent, written material on how to actually talk with the organizations afterwards, a full description of the tissues which will be donated, and a list of the companies that they're affiliating with, where the tissues go to. Meaning full disclosure to them to make sure that they can make an educated decision about if they really do want to donate or not donate. And I think that is a big portion of it, is making sure that that the families have the choice to make the correct decision for them, but they know where it's going for. What I really found out is this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much in this field that you can look at with an ethical hat on, you could say, and to pick out just one piece of it was a very challenging thing. Probably bit off more than I could chew. I encourage you guys to, if you want to read my paper, look at it and see what you think. As for me personally, I didn't make it my decision up either way. I didn't change my mind enough to say I support organ donation and tissue donation now, and I didn't say Av's absolutely right and the whole industry is